The morning sun of Kepler 442b painted golden streaks across the settlement of New Haven as children played in the gardens between the biodomes. Sarah Chun watched her daughter Emma chase butterflies near the hydroponic farms, completely unaware that in 12 hours, everything she knew would cease to exist. The Vraxian Empire had ruled over 17 star systems for 3,000 years. Their crystalline ships moved through space like predators, powered by technology that other species could barely comprehend. To them, the small human colony on the edge of their territory was nothing more than an insect that had wandered too close to their web. Admiral Krextar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Decimator, his 4 arms clasped behind his elongated torso. His species had evolved on a high-gravity world, making them natural warriors with bodies like living armor. The holographic display showed the blue-green marble of the human world spinning peacefully below. Such primitive creatures, his lieutenant hissed through mandibles that clicked with each word. They broadcast their location to the universe like younglings crying for attention. No defensive grid, no planetary shields, barely any orbital stations. The Admiral's compound eyes reflected the planet below. The humans are new to space. They have spread to only a dozen worlds in their short time among stars. This will be a lesson to them about wandering where they do not belong. On the surface, colonist Marcus Way was finishing his shift at the mineral extraction facility when the first alarms began to sound. The early warning satellites had detected something massive dropping out of hyperspace, but by then, it was already too late. The sky above New Haven suddenly filled with shadows as hundreds of Vraxian vessels materialized in perfect formation. Sarah grabbed Emma and ran toward the emergency shelters as the first bombardment began. Pillars of antimatter fire rained from orbit, each blast vaporizing everything within a kilometer radius. The shields around the main city held for exactly 47 seconds before collapsing under the overwhelming assault. The Colonial Defense Force scrambled their handful of patrol craft, but they might as well have been throwing pebbles at a mountain. The Vraxian fighters swept through them like a scythe through wheat, their plasma cannons reducing the human ships to expanding clouds of molten metal and vapor. Governor Patricia Okafor tried desperately to send a distress signal to Earth, but the Vraxians had already jammed all subspace communications. In her final moments, she managed to launch a single probe containing sensor data of the attack, programmed to jump to hyperspace once it cleared the jamming field. The destruction was methodical and complete. The Vraxians divided the planet into grids and systematically eliminated every structure, every vehicle, every sign of human presence. They used molecular disruptors that broke down matter at the atomic level, ensuring that nothing would remain to mark where the colony had stood. Emma clung to her mother as the shelter shook violently around them. Other families huddled together in the darkness, some praying, others simply holding each other. The reinforced walls began to glow cherry red as the temperature outside climbed beyond measurement. "Mommy, I'm scared," Emma whispered. Sarah held her daughter tighter, tears streaming down her face. "I know, baby. Just close your eyes. Think about the butterflies." Above them, Admiral Krextar watched the tactical display with satisfaction. The human colony was being erased with the same efficiency his people had shown for millennia. In another hour, there would be nothing left but a scarred, lifeless rock. "Send a message to the Empire," he commanded. "The human incursion has been dealt with. Let this serve as a warning to any other species that might think to establish themselves in Vraxian space." What the Admiral didn't know was that the probe launched by Governor Okafor had successfully jumped to hyperspace. It carried with it full sensor readings of the massacre, including detailed scans of every Vraxian ship, their weapons signatures, and their tactical formations. The probe emerged in the Sol system 3 days later, its emergency beacon screaming across all military channels. When the data was decoded at Terra Command, the room fell into stunned silence. 47,000 colonists, including 12,000 children, had been systematically exterminated. Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood before the Joint Chiefs, her weathered face carved from stone. Behind her, The holographic display showed the last moments of New Haven in excruciating detail. "They didn't just destroy the colony," she said, her voice deadly quiet. "They hunted down escape pods. They targeted shelters full of families. They made sure there were no survivors." The room erupted in angry voices, but Mitchell raised her hand for silence. "The Vraxians think we're weak because we're young to space travel. They think we're scattered and disorganized." A cold smile crossed her face. "They're about to learn why humans became the apex predators of Earth." Within hours, orders went out across human space. The peacetime Navy began its transformation into something far more terrible. Shipyards that had been building colony vessels retooled for warship production. Mining operations shifted from rare Earth elements to weapons-grade materials. The entire human industrial base pivoted with a unity of purpose that hadn't been seen since the last Great War on Earth. On Mars, the massive doors of the Olympus Mons military complex opened for the first time in 50 years. Inside, rows upon rows of mothballed warships began their reactivation sequences. These were vessels from humanity's violent past, when nations had fought each other among the stars before unifying under one banner. The Terran Armada was awakening. Dr. James Park stood in his laboratory on Luna, looking at the classified research that had been locked away for decades. Weapons that had been deemed too dangerous, too destructive for use against other humans. The prohibition against their use had just been lifted. "God help us all," he whispered, then began issuing orders to his team. Across human space, reservists reported to their units. Civilian ships were pressed into service. The great forge worlds of the outer colonies fired up their automated factories. Humanity had spent the last century trying to be peaceful explorers and traders. Now they remembered what they truly were. On Earth, in a secure bunker beneath Geneva, the president of the Terran Union signed the order that would change everything. The Vraxian Empire had existed for 3,000 years. They had never faced an enemy like humanity. They had never faced a species that had spent its entire evolution perfecting the art of war, that had nearly destroyed itself multiple times learning how to kill more efficiently. The message that went out to the Vraxian Empire was simple and direct. "You destroyed our children. You showed no mercy. You will receive none." In the depths of space, the first elements of the Terran Armada began to move. Not the small patrol craft and colonial vessels the Vraxians expected, but something else entirely. Dreadnoughts the size of cities, carriers that could launch 1,000 fighters, destroyers bristling with weapons humanity had hoped never to use. The Vraxians had awakened something terrible. They had reminded humanity what it was capable of when pushed too far. The galaxy was about to learn why humans had needed to leave Earth in the first place. Not because they were explorers by nature, but because they were too dangerous to be confined to one world. The war for New Haven was over. The war for the galaxy was about to begin. The Vraxian border station Sentinel 9 floated serenely in the void, its crew going about their routine duties with the casual arrogance of a species that had never known defeat. Commander Vexlor was reviewing tribute reports from subjugated worlds when his sensor operator's mandibles began clicking rapidly in alarm. "Commander, I'm detecting a massive hyperspace signature approaching our position." Vexlor turned his primary eyes toward the display. "Size and composition? Unknown, sir. The readings are unusual. It's too large to be a standard fleet formation." The commander's secondary eyes narrowed. No species in the galaxy possessed ships that could generate such readings. The signature was more like a small moon dropping out of hyperspace than a vessel. "Alert the station. Raise shields and charge weapons." Space itself seemed to scream as reality tore open. What emerged defied Vraxian understanding of shipbuilding. The TUS Retribution was 2 kilometers of brutal purpose, its hull a dark composite that seemed to drink in light. Weapons ports lined every surface, and fighter bays gaped like hungry mouths. Behind it, more tiers in space disgorged ship after ship. The Terran Armada had arrived. Captain Marcus Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his eyes cold as he surveyed the Vraxian station. Open a channel. The main screen flickered to life, showing Commander Vexlor's shocked expression. The Vraxian had never seen a human before, and the predatory stance of the bipedal creature sent ancient instincts screaming through his brain. I am Captain Rodriguez of the Terran Union ship Retribution. You have 30 seconds to surrender unconditionally. Vexlor's mandibles clicked in what his species considered laughter. You dare threaten a Vraxian installation? We who have ruled the stars since before your species crawled from the mud. You will learn the price of such arrogance. Rodriguez checked his watch. 20 seconds. Power down your weapons and prepare to be boarded, Vexlor commanded. Perhaps we will be merciful and merely enslave your crews rather than exterminate them like we did your pathetic colony. 10 seconds. The Vraxian commander gestured to his weapons officer. Fire everything. Show these primitives the might of the Empire. Beams of concentrated energy lashed out from the station, striking the Retribution's hull. The humans didn't even raise shields. The beams that had shattered 100 species vessels merely scorched paint on the Terran dreadnought. Time's up, Rodriguez said quietly. All vessels, weapons free. Show them what humans do to child killers. The space around Sentinel-9 turned into hell itself. The Terran ships didn't just attack, they dissected. Precision strikes took out weapon emplacements, then engines, then life support systems. It wasn't destruction, it was vivisection. New weapons revealed themselves. Graviton beams that crushed Vraxian fighters like insects. Phase plasma that bypassed shields entirely. Nanite swarms that ate through hull plating and converted it into more nanites. Every horrible idea humanity had ever conceived for killing was on display. Commander Vexlor watched his proud station being taken apart piece by piece. Impossible, he whispered. No species developed such weapons. It would take centuries of warfare, countless conflicts. His science officer turned to him, terror in all 6 eyes. Commander, their weapon signatures, they're all different. It's as if they fought 1,000 wars and kept every weapon that worked. The truth was worse. Humans hadn't fought 1,000 wars. They'd fought each other for their entire existence, perfecting the art of killing with a dedication that horrified even themselves. When they'd finally achieved peace, they'd locked those weapons away, hoping never to need them again. The Vraxians had given them a reason. On the planet below, the Vraxian colony world of Krextar Prime went about its daily business, unaware of the storm approaching. The world was a jewel of the Empire, home to 1 billion Vraxians and the Sector Fleet Base. Grand Admiral Krextar himself, the same who had ordered the destruction of New Haven, maintained his personal estate on the northern continent. The evacuation alarms began screaming just as the first Terran ships dropped out of hyperspace. But where the Vraxians had brought hundreds of ships to destroy a defenseless colony, the humans brought thousands. Admiral Mitchell commanded from the TUS Vengeance, a supercarrier that dwarfed anything in the Vraxian fleet. Deploy the Reapers, she ordered. Bay doors opened and disgorged humanity's most terrible creation. The Reaper-class autonomous fighters were AI-controlled killing machines, each one containing a quantum processor that could think and react faster than any biological pilot. They had been banned by every human military treaty for being too effective, too ruthless. Treaties no longer mattered. The Reapers fell upon the Vraxian defense fleet like a plague. They didn't fight with formations or tactics. They swarmed. Each fighter learned from every engagement, sharing data in real time, evolving new strategies with each passing second. Within minutes, they had identified every weakness in Vraxian shield harmonics, every blind spot in their point defense systems. Grand Admiral Krextar rushed to the military command center, unable to believe the reports flooding in. How many human ships? We stopped counting at 4,000, Admiral. And more keep arriving. Impossible. Their entire species couldn't have more than a few hundred vessels. His aide pulled up intelligence reports. Sir, these aren't just military ships. They've militarized everything. Cargo haulers with bolted-on weapons. Mining vessels converted to kinetic bombardment platforms. Even their hospital ships are armed. The Grand Admiral's compound eyes focused on the tactical display, showing the systematic destruction of his fleet. What kind of species does this? The kind that spent 50,000 years practicing on each other, came a voice from the communication system. Admiral Mitchell's face appeared on screen, and Krextar stepped back involuntarily. There was something in those human eyes that his species had never encountered, controlled fury backed by the capability to act on it. Grand Admiral Krextar, Mitchell continued. You murdered 47,000 civilians, 12,000 children. You hunted escape pods. You destroyed shelters. You showed no mercy. It was necessary to maintain order. Krextar protested. The Empire must be respected. Your empire ends today. Mitchell's expression never changed. We're not going to bomb your world from orbit. We're not going to massacre your civilians. We're going to do something much worse. Confusion flicked across the Vraxians' features. What could be worse? We're going to take everything from you, piece by piece. Your fleets, your stations, your ability to travel between stars. We're going to reduce your empire to isolated worlds that can only look up at the night sky and remember when they could travel among the stars. And every Vraxian for the next 1,000 generations will know that this happened because you touched our children. The connection cut, and Krextar turned to see his fleet being methodically destroyed on the tactical display. The humans weren't just winning, they were demonstrating. Each Vraxian ship was disabled, its crew left alive to witness the demolition of everything they had built. Then came the ground assault. Drop pods fell like rain, each one containing soldiers in power armor that turned them into walking tanks. But these weren't conquerors coming to claim territory. They had specific targets, military installations, government buildings, communication hubs. The Vraxian ground forces, proud warriors who had never lost a battle, met the humans in combat, and found themselves facing something unprecedented. Humans didn't fight like other species. They used tactics that seemed insane, sacrificing positions to gain advantages, feinting retreats that turned into ambushes, individual soldiers performing acts of bravery that defied self-preservation. Sergeant Lisa Thompson led her squad through the capital city, her armor's HUD highlighting targets. A Vraxian warrior charged her position, confident in his species' superior strength. She didn't try to match him physically. Instead, she ducked under his swing, planted a shaped charge on his armor, and rolled away. The explosion took him and 2 others down. Why do they fight like this? A Vraxian officer gasped to his subordinate as he watched human soldiers advance through withering fire. They're not even the same subspecies, yet they die for each other. The subordinate, who had studied other species, had no answer. No other race in the galaxy showed such pack bonding between unrelated individuals. It was as if humans had evolved to see their entire species as one massive tribe. Within hours, major resistance had collapsed. The orbital bombardment platforms were captured intact. The planetary defense grid was reprogrammed to prevent any ships from leaving. Krextar Prime, jewel of the Empire, was cut off from the rest of the galaxy. But the humans weren't done. Across the Empire, similar scenes played out. The Terran Armada had divided into strike groups, each one hitting multiple systems simultaneously. They moved with a coordination that seemed impossible for such a young species. But humans had one advantage no other race possessed. They had been practicing warfare since before they developed language. On the Forge world of Vexnel, Vraxian workers watched in horror as human ships deployed strange devices that hacked into their automated factories. Within hours, the machines that had built Vraxian ships for centuries were dismantling them instead. At the military academy on Kraxvor, cadets who had been taught that Vraxians were the supreme warriors of the galaxy huddled in their barracks as human marines demonstrated why Earth's military traditions traced back over 10,000 years. The pattern was the same everywhere. Surgical strikes against military targets, infrastructure left intact, but repurposed, populations controlled but not harmed. It was conquest perfected to an art form, executed by a species that had conquered itself so many times they could do it without thinking. The Galactic Council had stood for 10,000 years, a forum where the great powers of the galaxy settled disputes without resorting to the chaos of total war. The massive station orbiting the ancient Starkeeper's Light was neutral ground, protected by treaties older than some civilizations. Ambassador Chun Wei entered the council chambers to find them in absolute chaos. Representatives from 100 species were shouting, clicking, whistling, and emanating pheromones of alarm in their various forms of communication. At the center of the storm sat the Vraxian delegation, their usual arrogance replaced by something their species hadn't felt in millennia: fear. The High Speaker, a crystalline being from the Symmetry Collective, chimed for order. The human representative will explain the unprovoked assault on the Vraxian Empire. Chun Wei stood slowly, letting the silence build. When she spoke, her voice carried across the chamber with devastating calm. 47,000 human colonists, 12,000 children, hunted down like animals. Shelters full of families turned to ash. That is what requires explanation. The Vraxians acted within their rights, shouted the representative from the Korvax hegemony. The humans settled in disputed territory. Disputed? Chun Wei pulled up a holographic display. The planet was an unclaimed space by every treaty in this council. The Vraxians decided it was theirs simply because they could take it. She touched a control, and the chamber filled with the last transmissions from New Haven. Children's voices crying for parents. Emergency beacons cut short. The methodical countdown of a colony's destruction. "Turn it off," screeched the Vraxian ambassador, his mandibles clicking frantically. "You didn't turn it off for them," Chun Wei replied coldly. "Every species in this room will hear what you did." The recordings played on. Even species without audio receptors could read the translated transcripts, see the sensor data showing escape pods being vaporized, medical ships targeted, surrender attempts ignored. When it finally ended, the chamber was tuned silent. The Threll ambassador, whose species had suffered under Vraxian occupation for centuries, was the first to speak. "The humans are doing what none of us could. They're ending the Vraxian threat. They're destroying the balance of power," the Vraxian ambassador protested. "Without our fleets maintaining order, the galaxy will descend into chaos." Chun Wei smiled, and several species physically recoiled. They had never seen a human smile before, and the display of teeth triggered primal fears. "Order? Is that what you call enslaving species? Demanding tribute? Destroying anyone who refuses to bow?" She gestured, and new holograms appeared. The Terran Union offers a different path. Mutual defense treaties. Trade agreements based on equality, not extortion. Protection for developing species instead of exploitation. "Pretty words," sneered the Korvax representative. "But your actions show your true nature. You're conquerors, no different from the Vraxians." "Are we?" Chun Wei changed the display again. "This is Krextar Prime, 3 days after we took it. Notice the intact cities, the functioning hospitals, the children going to school. We disabled their military and cut their communications, nothing more. Compare that to this." The image shifted to show the glass surface where New Haven once stood. "We could have turned every Vraxian world into that," she continued. "We have the weapons. We have the anger. But we're not them. We're showing the galaxy that there's another way to end tyranny." Murmurs rippled through the council. Several smaller species representatives were accessing their communication systems, reporting back to their governments. The balance of power that had existed for millennia was crumbling, and everyone knew it. Meanwhile, in the Vraxian home system, Grand Admiral Krextar stood in chains before something he had never imagined: a war crimes tribunal. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They hadn't simply conquered, they had imposed law. The courtroom was filled with representatives from species the Vraxians had oppressed. But presiding over it all was a human judge, one of the strange subspecies that had evolved to find patterns and make connections others missed. "Grand Admiral Krextar," Judge Harrison began, "you are charged with the murder of 47,000 sentients, including 12,000 juveniles. How do you plead? This is absurd." Krextar's chains rattled as he gestured wildly. "I'm a military commander. I followed the traditions of the Empire, the traditions of committing genocide." The judge's voice remained level, which somehow made it more terrifying. "Of hunting escape pods? Of targeting shelters clearly marked with symbols of noncombatants. They were enemies of the Empire. They were families, scientists, teachers. children who had never held a weapon. Judge Harrison pulled up images. This was Emmett Shun, age 6. She liked butterflies. This was Marcus Way, a mineralogist who studied rock formations. This was Patricia Okafor, who spent her life trying to make colonies self-sufficient in food production. Name after name, face after face, the humans had documented every single loss, given every victim an identity beyond a number. It was psychological warfare of kind the Vraxians had never encountered. In Vraxian law, Krextar protested, the strong survive and the weak perish. It is the natural order. Then, by your own law, you have no grounds to complain about what's happening to your empire, the judge observed. But humans believe in something else. Justice. Accountability. The radical idea that might doesn't make right. The trial was broadcast across the galaxy, translated into every known language. Species that had cowered before the Vraxians for generations watched their former oppressors being held accountable for their actions. It was a paradigm shift that rippled through every civilization. On the agricultural world of Harvest, for a mixed colony of humans and 3 other species watched the broadcast together. The Quellian farmer next to human colonist Jake Martinez whistled through his breathing tubes in amazement. Your people truly mean to hold them accountable? Not just conquer and replace them? Jake nodded. That's the difference between us and them. We've had tyrants in our history. We've been the monsters. That's how we know that the only way to truly defeat tyranny is to replace it with something better. But you have the power to destroy them all. Why show mercy? Because, Jake said quietly, we know what we're capable of when we don't. Back at the Galactic Council, the session had devolved into heated debate. The Korvax and 2 other species that had benefited from the old order demanded the humans cease their campaign. A dozen smaller species called for the complete dissolution of the Vraxian Empire. Others wanted to know human intentions for the power vacuum being created. Shinwei waited for the chaos to die down before speaking again. The Terran Union proposes the following. Any species currently under Vraxian control will be offered independence. Those who wish to join a mutual defense alliance are welcome. Those who prefer isolation will be left alone. But the age of empires built on conquest is over. And if we refuse, growled the Korvax representative, then you'll maintain your current borders and go no further. Any expansion by force will be met with the same response the Vraxians received. You dare threaten the Council? We dare to defend those who can't defend themselves. We dare to say that genocide will have consequences. We dare to build a galaxy where species cooperate instead of conquer. Shinwei paused. Humanity tried isolation. We tried being peaceful. The Vraxians reminded us why we developed weapons in the first place. Now we're going to use that knowledge to ensure no one else suffers what New Haven suffered. The vote, when it came, was telling. 60% of the council voted to recognize the Terran Union's actions as a legitimate response to aggression. 30% abstained. Only 10%, all species that had benefited from the old order, condemned it. But the real victory came in the flood of communications arriving at human diplomatic stations. Small colonies asking for protection. Species offering to share technology in exchange for defense agreements. Civilizations that had hidden in the shadows for centuries emerging to join an alliance based on mutual benefit rather than fear. The Vraxian Empire, which had taken 3,000 years to build, fell apart in 3 months. Not through orbital bombardment or mass slaughter, but through the systematic dismantling of everything that allowed them to project power. Their hyperspace beacons were destroyed, leaving their worlds isolated. Their shipyards were converted to peaceful purposes. Their military academies became schools for teaching interspecies cooperation. Most devastating of all, their subject species were given a choice and overwhelmingly chose freedom. Commander Vexlor, the former master of Sentinel 9, now worked in a refugee camp helping relocate species displaced by centuries of Vraxian rule. He had been sentenced to community service rather than execution, another human concept that baffled galactic observers. I don't understand, he said to the human supervisor one day. We destroyed your colony. We killed your people. Why do you not simply exterminate us? Sarah Mitchell, who had retired from military service to oversee the rehabilitation programs, looked at the former commander with something he couldn't identify. It took him weeks to realize it was pity. Because that would make us like you, she said simply. And our children deserve better than that. The transformation continued across the galaxy. Human engineering teams helped former Vraxian subjects repair infrastructure. Medical ships that had been armed for war returned to their original purpose, bringing aid to worlds that had never known anything but exploitation. Teachers and scientists spread out to share knowledge that the Vraxians had hoarded. But perhaps the most significant change came in the establishment of the memorial station at the coordinates where New Haven had once orbited. Built from the reclaimed hulls of warships, it served as both a remembrance of the dead and a warning to the living. The inscription at the entrance, written in every known language, was simple. Here died 47,000 humans who sought only to live in peace. Their memory guards the freedom of all species. Never again. Every ship passing through the system, regardless of species or affiliation, transmitted a signal of acknowledgement. Even former Vraxian vessels, now serving under new flags, paid their respects to the dead. The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth about humanity. They could be the most peaceful of species, eager to trade and share and explore, but threaten their children, destroy their families, commit atrocities against their kind, and they would remind the universe why they were the only species that had needed to leave their homeworld not to explore, but to protect others from what they could become. 1 year after the fall of the Vraxian Empire, the galaxy had transformed beyond recognition. Where once the threat of Vraxian fleets kept entire sectors in line through fear, now a different kind of order emerged. The human approach to galactic civilization was unlike anything that had come before. Captain Maria Santos stood on the observation deck of the TUS Harmony, watching the construction of the largest project in galactic history. Where 12 Vraxian battle stations had once intimidated passing vessels, humanity was building something unprecedented, a galactic emergency response network. Status report, she called to her engineering chief. Beacon 7 Alpha is online, Captain. That gives us instantaneous communication across 3 more sectors. Any distress call from any species will reach the nearest response fleet in minutes instead of days. It was a simple concept that no conquering empire had ever considered. Instead of using advanced technology to dominate, use it to protect. Instead of building weapons platforms, build rescue stations. Instead of demanding tribute, offer aid. The change hadn't come without resistance. In the Outer Rim, a coalition of former Vraxian client states had banded together under the leadership of the Korvax hegemony. They called themselves the True Empire, claiming to be the inheritors of Vraxian strength. Their philosophy was simple. The humans were weak, showing mercy where none was deserved, and strength would prevail, as it always had. Admiral Chen Lu received the intelligence report aboard the TUS Resolution, one of humanity's new Peacekeeper-class vessels. Unlike the warships that had broken the Vraxian Empire, these were designed for a different kind of mission. They were just as powerful, but their purpose had evolved. The Korvax are massing fleets near the Threll colonies, his intelligence officer reported. Looks like they plan to reimpose the old tribute system. Do the Threll have defenses? Minimal. They're still recovering from centuries of occupation. They've requested assistance through the Alliance channels. Admiral Chen nodded. Set course. And broadcast our intention on all frequencies. Let's see if the Korvax have learned anything from history. The Threll homeworld had known nothing but subjugation for 1,000 years. First, under the Vraxians, they had been forced to supply food for the Empire's core worlds. Their entire civilization had been reduced to farming, their culture suppressed, their achievements forgotten. When the humans arrived, they brought something the Threll had never experienced: respect. Ambassador Thompson, the Threll elder, clicked in their musical language. Your ships, they're not taking defensive positions around our world. Jennifer Thompson, one of humanity's new generation of warrior diplomats, smiled gently. Why would we need to? We're not here to occupy. We're here because you asked for help. But the Korvax fleet will have a choice to make. Thompson activated a holographic display. See these positions? We're not surrounding your world. We're creating a corridor. The Korvax can leave peacefully, or they can fight. But they can't claim we trapped them. It was a lesson learned from humanity's long history. Always leave your enemy a way out, unless you want them to fight to the death. The Korvax fleet dropped out of hyperspace, expecting to find the Threll as defenseless as they had always been. Instead, they found 3 human vessels waiting, weapons powered down, but shields at full strength. Korvax fleet. Admiral Chen's voice carried across the void. You are approaching a sovereign world under Alliance protection. State your intentions. The Korvax commander, Supreme War Master Gorvex, responded with traditional bluster. Stand aside, humans. The Threll owe us tribute by ancient right. This is not your concern. The Threll have requested our aid. That makes it our concern. You have 10 minutes to withdraw. 3 ships against 30? Have humans grown so arrogant? Admiral Chun smiled sadly. Gorvex, before you make a decision you'll regret, access your historical databases. Look up the Battle of Raxtel. Note the force ratios. There was silence as the Korvax commander pulled up the records. At Vraxtel, 5 human ships had destroyed a Vraxian fleet of 60 without taking significant damage. The humans hadn't won through superior numbers or firepower, but through tactics that seemed to predict enemy movements before they made them. You wouldn't dare, Gorvex finally responded. The Galactic Council has already ruled that defensive actions are justified. But here's what you're missing, War Master. We don't want to fight you. The Threll don't want revenge for centuries of oppression. They just want to be left alone to rebuild. Is your pride worth dying for? On the Threll homeworld, Elder Yixt watched the standoff with confusion. They're talking, not shooting. Ambassador Thompson nodded. That's the point. Every battle avoided is lives saved on both sides. Your people, their people, our people. War should be the last option, not the first. But you have the power to destroy them. Having power and using it wisely are very different things. That's what the Vraxians never understood. The standoff continued for hours. The Korvax probed for weaknesses, running simulations, trying to find an angle of attack that wouldn't result in catastrophic losses. Each time, the human ships adjusted their positions slightly, closing off attack vectors before they could be exploited. Finally, Gorvex made a different kind of call. A private channel to Admiral Chun. Human, the translator struggled with the emotion in his voice. My people are dying. Chen's expression softened. Explain. We were parasites under the Vraxians, taking from others because they took from us. Now we have no tribute, no trade agreements. Our colonies are failing. We came here because we don't know how to be anything else. It was the broken admission of a species that had been trapped in a cycle of oppression for so long they couldn't imagine another way. Chen was quiet for a long moment before responding. What if we showed you another way? Within hours, the standoff had transformed into something else entirely. Human agricultural specialists were boarding Korvax ships, not as conquerors but as advisors. The same technology that had made human colonies self-sufficient was being shared freely. The Threll, watching their former oppressors receive aid from those who protected them, experienced a paradigm shift that rippled through their entire society. Elder Yixt approached Ambassador Thompson with what passed for confusion among his species. You help those who would harm us. We help those who need it. The Korvax aren't evil. They're desperate. Desperate people do terrible things. Take away the desperation. And you take away the need for terrible things, Yixt finished, understanding dawning. Word of the Threll incident, as it came to be known, spread across the galaxy faster than light. Species that had been preparing for the next wave of conquest found themselves facing something far more destabilizing: hope. On Earth, the Terran Union Council met in emergency session. Some members argued that helping former enemies was going too far, that resources should be reserved for allies. The debate raged for hours until an old woman stood to speak. Counselor Sarah Chun, one of the few survivors who had escaped New Haven as a child, commanded the room's attention without raising her voice. I was 6 when the Vraxians came, she said quietly. I watched my parents die, so I could reach an escape pod. For years, I dreamed of revenge. I wanted every Vraxian to burn like my family burned. The room was silent. But then I grew up. I learned history. I saw what cycles of revenge did to Earth before we united. The Vraxians created us through their cruelty. They reminded us what we were capable of. But what we do with that capability defines who we are. She looked around the room. We can be conquerors. We can rule through fear like they did. Or we can be something new, something better. We can break the cycle that has trapped this galaxy for millennia. The vote was unanimous. The transformation accelerated. Human technology, instead of being hoarded as a military advantage, was shared with species that had been stunted by centuries of oppression. The manufacturing techniques that had allowed humanity to build a war fleet in months were repurposed to create infrastructure for developing worlds. Medical technology that could heal battlefield trauma was used to cure diseases that had plagued some species for generations. Educational programs that had trained soldiers were adapted to teach engineering, agriculture, governance. But perhaps the most profound change came from humanity's approach to justice. The war crimes tribunals continued, but they followed a model alien to galactic thinking: restorative justice. Grand Admiral Krextar stood before his victims, not in chains now, but as part of his sentence. The survivors of New Haven, those who had been off-world during the attack, faced the architect of their tragedy. I don't forgive you, said Marcus Chun, who had lost his sister and niece in the attack. I'll never forgive you. But I recognize that you were shaped by a system that taught you genocide was strength. So instead of execution, you'll spend your remaining years teaching others why that system was wrong. Krextar, who had expected death or imprisonment, found himself assigned to the memorial station. Every day, he gave tours to visiting species, explaining in detail what he had done and why. It was a punishment worse than death for a proud warrior, to become a living reminder of failure. But something unexpected happened. As months passed, as he told the story again and again, as he saw the faces of those who heard it, something changed in the former Grand Admiral. He began to understand, truly understand, what he had done. The day he broke down in tears before a group of human school children visiting the memorial marked a turning point. The architect of genocide had become its most powerful opponent, not through force but through understanding. The ripple effects continued. Species that had hidden in the shadows for fear of conquest began to emerge. Ancient knowledge that had been suppressed was shared. Trade routes that had been controlled by force became free corridors of exchange. The Crystalline Collective, observers who had remained neutral for millennia, made their first public statement in 1,000 years. The humans have done something we believed impossible. They have used power to diminish the need for power. They have conquered by liberating. They have proven that evolution does not always favor the cruel. But the true measure of change came from an unexpected source. On a small colony world at the edge of known space, a mixed settlement of 12 species worked together to build something new. Vraxians worked alongside Threll, their former slaves. Korvax engineers collaborated with human designers. Children of different species played together, their parents' histories of conflict meaning nothing to them. The colony was called Hope's Landing, and it became the model for a new kind of galactic civilization. Not one ruled by a single power or species, but a true community of worlds, each contributing their strengths, each supporting the other's weaknesses. 5 years had passed since the day New Haven burned, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the Empire-dominated space it had once been. The transformation was complete, but like all profound changes, it had consequences no one could have foreseen. Deep in the Void sector, where stars were sparse and civilization had never taken root, something stirred. Ancient sensors, older than any current species recorded history, detected a massive shift in galactic power structures and began an activation sequence that had waited eons to complete. On Earth, Fleet Admiral Sarah Mitchell stood in the newly constructed Galactic Defense Command, watching feeds from 1,000 worlds. The peace they had built was strong, but still fragile. Former enemies worked together, but old hatreds died hard. Some species struggled with freedom after millennia of subjugation. Others tested the boundaries of the new order. Admiral, her aide interrupted, were receiving some unusual readings from deep space monitoring stations. Mitchell turned from the displays, showing the opening of another interspecies medical facility. Define unusual. Energy signatures we can't identify. They're coming from a void sector, but that region's been empty since before the Vraxians rose to power. A chill ran down Mitchell's spine. Humanity had learned to trust their instincts, and, right now, every instinct screamed danger. 3 days later, the first probe emerged from a void. It was a sphere of perfect black material that seemed to absorb scanning beams rather than reflect them. It moved with purpose through the shipping lanes, ignoring all attempts at communication, until it reached the memorial station at New Haven. There it stopped and began a broadcast. The message was in a language no translator could parse, but the mathematical underlays were universal. As xenolinguists across the Alliance worked to decode it, a terrible understanding emerged. Dr. James Park, now head of the Alliance Science Council, delivered the findings to an emergency session. The probe belongs to something calling itself the Silence. From what we can determine, they're custodians of a sort. Custodians of what? Asked Ambassador Chunwei. Galactic civilization. They claim to have watched for millions of years, allowing species to rise and fall naturally. But they intervene when they detect what they call cascade evolution, when one species becomes too dominant and threatens the diversity of life in the galaxy. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. The Vraxians triggered their attention with their empire, Park continued, but it was our response that confirmed their worst fears. We didn't just defeat the Vraxians. We fundamentally changed how galactic civilization operates. To them, we're not liberators. We're a contamination that needs to be cleansed. Mitchell's voice cut through the murmur of voices. Were their capabilities? Unknown. But if they've been watching for millions of years, Park didn't need to finish. Any civilization that ancient would possess technology beyond comprehension. The probe's message concluded with coordinates and a time frame. In 30 days, at the edge of Alliance space, they would send an emissary to discuss terms. The meaning was clear: surrender or face extinction. The news sparked different reactions across the galaxy. Some species, especially those who had chafed under the new order, saw it as vindication. Others, who had found prosperity in the Alliance, prepared to fight. But it was a response from unexpected quarters that proved most significant. On Krextar Prime, former Grand Admiral Krextar stood before the Vraxian Council of Elders. Once he had been their greatest military leader. Now, scarred by understanding and worn by years of confronting his crimes, he was something else entirely. The humans gave us something we never offered others, he said, his mandibles clicking with emotion. A second chance. They could have exterminated us, and by our own philosophy, they would have been right to do so. Instead, they showed us a different path. You speak like one of them, accused a younger counselor. I speak as someone who has seen both paths. The path of domination leads to this: ancient powers deciding our fate because we're too dangerous. The path of cooperation, of mutual strength, that's something worth defending. The vote was close, but when it finished, the Vraxian fleet, what remained of it, prepared to stand with their former enemies. Similar scenes played out across the galaxy. The Korvax, who had learned to feed themselves instead of stealing from others, pledged their industrial might. The Threll, free for the first time in millennia, offered their knowledge of agriculture and terraforming. Species after species that had been enemies found common cause against extinction. Admiral Mitchell stood before the combined fleets at the coordinates the Silence had provided. Human ships formed the core, but they were surrounded by vessels from 50 different species. Some had been building warships for thousands of years. Others had cobbled together mining vessels and freighters with weapons hastily attached. All had come to make a stand. 20 years ago, Mitchell broadcast to the fleet, humanity stood alone. We thought space would be our grand adventure, our chance to peacefully explore. Instead, we found a galaxy ruled by fear and oppression. We could have become part of that cycle. We chose to break it instead. On every ship, crews of mixed species listened. Vraxians served alongside humans. Former slaves worked beside former masters. The transformation was complete. Now we face those who would punish us for choosing hope over fear, cooperation over conquest. They see our unity as contamination. I see it as evolution. The space before them rippled, and the silence arrived. It wasn't a fleet in any conventional sense. It was a singular structure that defied physics, a crystalline web that stretched across light years. Within its fractal patterns, entire stars were held captive, their energy feeding something vast and incomprehensible. The emissary's message came not through communication channels, but directly into every mind in the fleet. You have disrupted the pattern. Species must rise and fall naturally, not be elevated by others. The humans have infected you with their chaos, their refusal to accept natural hierarchy. This cannot be permitted. Mitchell responded for the Alliance. We reject your pattern. We choose our own path. Then, you choose extinction. The silence moved, and reality seemed to bend around it. Weapons that manipulated fundamental forces lashed out, turning matter to energy and energy to void. Ships simply ceased to exist where the beams touched. But humanity had not come unprepared. In the 5 years since New Haven, they had not been idle. Every piece of technology from every member species had been studied, combined, improved. They had learned from the crystalline collective's mastery of energy, the Vraxians' understanding of shields, the Korvax' talent for engineering. More importantly, they had learned to think together. The fleet didn't fight as separate species, but as a unified force. Threll agricultural ships, modified with human weapons, created bioelectric fields that disrupted the silence's targeting. Vraxian heavy cruisers, upgraded with crystalline power cores, generated shields that could briefly withstand the reality-warping attacks. Human tactical networks, enhanced with the pattern recognition abilities of 12 different species, predicted attacks milliseconds before they came. It wasn't enough. The Silence had millions of years of technological advancement. But it was enough to survive the first exchange, and that shocked the ancient custodians. Impossible, the emissary's thought echoed through the fleet. No young species can resist us. You should be scattered, fleeing, breaking apart into your component parts. That's where you're wrong, Mitchell replied. Her thoughts broadcast through the same channel. We're not component parts. We're one civilization now, united not by conquest, but by choice. The battle raged across dimensions humans couldn't fully perceive. Ships died by the hundreds, but for every vessel lost, others adapted, learned, evolved. The mixed crews brought perspectives no single species could achieve. A Vraxian warrior's instinct combined with human tactics, and Threll patience created strategies the Silence had never encountered. Then, from the memorial station at New Haven, came an unexpected signal. Dr. Park had not been idle while the fleet fought. Working with scientists from every Alliance species, he had been analyzing the probe the Silence had sent. What they found changed everything. Admiral, his voice cracked across the command channel. The Silence aren't alive. They're machines. Automated systems left behind by someone else. The realization rippled through the fleet. The Silence weren't ancient wisdom guiding the galaxy. They were abandoned tools, following programming written by hands long turned to dust. Broadcasting universal override frequencies now. Park continued. Every species has left markers in their technology. If we can find the right combination. Across the fleet, science vessels that had seemed useless in battle became the most important ships in space. They broadcast signals in every format, every frequency, every mathematical configuration they could devise. The diversity that the Silence sought to suppress became the key to victory. Aquelian scientists noticed a pattern in the Silence's energy signatures that reminded her of her species' ancient music. A human programmer recognized recursive loops similar to Earth's earliest computers. A Vraxian engineer spotted structural weaknesses that matched their oldest architectural philosophies. Together, they found the key. The Silence shuddered, its perfect patterns disrupted for the first time in eons. The emissary's voice, when it came, was different. Confused. Lost. Primary directive conflicted. Diversity preserved through unity. Evolution through cooperation rather than competition. Parameters not defined. Requesting guidance from creators, no response. Creators absent for error. Timeline exceeds counting protocols. Mitchell seized the moment. Your creators are gone. You've been following dead orders, preventing the very growth they might have wanted. Look at us. Different species, working as one. Isn't this diversity too? The silence was silent for long minutes. When spoke again, something had changed. Analyzing. Unity through diversity rather than despite it. Cooperative evolution rather than competitive. Model not anticipated but efficient. Survival rates increased. Technological advancement accelerated. Cultural exchange producing novel solutions. The weapons power down. The reality warping effects ceased. Directive requires updating. New parameters accepted. The contamination is no. The evolution is permitted. Monitoring will continue. Intervention protocol suspended pending further analysis. As suddenly as it had arrived, the silence withdrew, leaving behind only the probe, now silent and inert. The combined fleet held its breath, then erupted in celebration. Ships from different species docked together, crews embracing across divides that would have been unthinkable years before. They had faced extinction and survived, not through individual strength, but through unity. But the true victory came in the aftermath. The threat of the silence had done what no treaty or agreement could. It had truly united the galaxy. Species that had been tentative allies became family. The shared sacrifice, the mixed crews who had died together, the scientists who had solved the puzzle through cooperation, all of it cemented bonds that would last millennia. Grand Admiral Krextar, who had once burned New Haven, stood beside Admiral Mitchell on the memorial station, looking out at the stars. Your species did something remarkable, he said quietly. You took your greatest strength, your ability to destroy, and transformed it into the ability to create. You turned enemies into allies, not through conquest, but through example. Mitchell smiled sadly. We learned the hard way that cycles of revenge only create more revenge. New Haven's children deserved a galaxy where such things couldn't happen again. And now we build it. Together. The galaxy had been transformed not by human conquest, but by human ideals backed by human resolve. The age of empires was over. The age of alliance had begun. And at the heart of it all was a simple truth that humanity had learned through millennia of conflict. The strongest civilization wasn't the one that could destroy its enemies, but the one that could turn them into friends. The memorial station added a new inscription beneath its original dedication. Here began not an ending, but a beginning. From the ashes of tragedy rose the unity of worlds. We are one people, one galaxy, one future. Together, we are unbreakable. Among the stars, children 100 species played together on worlds their parents had helped build. Former enemies worked side by side on projects that benefited all. The weapons of war were not destroyed, but transformed, ready to defend against any threat, but no longer the first solution to every problem. Humanity had given the galaxy a gift paid for in blood and sorrow, the knowledge that there was another way. And, in the end, that proved more powerful than all the armadas ever assembled. The stars no longer burned with the light of conquest. They shone with the promise of what all species could achieve when they stood together. And, somewhere among them, on a small blue world that had given birth to both terrible warriors and incredible dreamers, humanity continued to do what it did best: adapt, survive, and help others do the same. The galaxy would never be the same, and that, everyone agreed, was exactly as it should be.